I'd always prided myself on being in tune with the rhythms of my home, the familiar hum of everyday life, the playful shouts of my daughter, the comforting murmur of my wife's laughter as she chatted away on the phone. But that day, something felt profoundly off. I had left work a bit earlier than usual, looking forward to a quiet dinner with my family. Instead, as I pulled into the driveway, an eerie silence greeted me. A silence so deep that it unnerved me immediately. I stepped out of the car and walked up to the front door, each step weighted by a growing sense of dread. Normally, I'd expect to hear Lily's giggles or the soft tunes of her favorite cartoon playing somewhere inside. But today, the house was unusually quiet. My gut twisted with anxiety. I tried to shake it off, attributing the hush to a possible nap or a rare moment of calm. But then, from somewhere deeper inside the house, I caught a sound. A sound I never thought I'd hear in my own home. It started as a low murmur, then escalated into distinct laughter. A deep, unfamiliar chuckle that sent shivers down my spine. I froze in the hallway, the sounds leading me to the bedroom. Each step felt like wading through molasses, my heart pounding louder with every beat. What could possibly be happening in my own house? I didn't have long to wonder. The closer I got, the louder the voices became. I pressed my ear to the door, and the muffled conversation was unmistakable. It was my wife, Melissa. The sound of her voice, warm and inviting as it usually was, now laced with an intimacy that I hadn't witnessed before. And there was another voice in the mix. A man's voice, casual and light, sharing laughs that belonged to moments I had never experienced with her. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible. My heart pounded so hard I could barely breathe. I reached for the doorknob, each second feeling like an eternity as I battled between confronting whatever lay behind the door and retreating back into the safety of ignorance. But curiosity, or perhaps a desperate need to reclaim some control over the situation, pushed me forward. Slowly, almost mechanically, I opened the door just a crack, enough to peer inside. What I saw shattered every expectation I had built about trust, loyalty, and the very fabric of my family life. There, bathed in the soft glow of a bedside lamp, was Melissa, my wife, with a man I recognized all too well. It wasn't a stranger at all. It was Derek, my best friend, someone I trusted implicitly, someone I'd confided in through years of shared secrets and laughter. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. I stood there, paralyzed by disbelief and a raw, searing pain that spread like wildfire through my chest. The scene in front of me felt surreal, an image I had desperately tried to avoid imagining. My mind raced through countless memories. The nights we'd spent laughing together, the moments I'd believed were genuine expressions of friendship and love, now tainted by betrayal. I felt as if the ground beneath me had crumbled away, leaving me stranded in a void of hurt and confusion. Every instinct screamed to slam the door, to confront them, to demand answers that I wasn't sure I even wanted to hear. But another part of me, the rational part that had been honed through years of quiet introspection, urged me to pause, to observe, to try to understand what could have possibly led to this moment. I couldn't help but wonder, had I missed the signs? Was there something I had overlooked in our interactions? Some silent cry for help or a warning I was too blinded by routine to hear? In that suspended moment, my mind churned with a mix of rage, sorrow, and disbelief. The betrayal stung deeply, leaving me grappling with emotions I wasn't prepared to face. I felt exposed, as if the secrets I had long buried within me were now laid bare, vulnerable and raw. The house that once symbolized safety and love had transformed into a stage for a drama I had never signed up to play. Without a clear plan or understanding of what came next, I backed away slowly, heart heavy with a sorrow that seemed to echo through the silent corridors of my mind. I closed the door gently behind me, as if doing so might somehow contain the chaos that had burst into my life. I stood there for a long moment in the hallway, the silence now mocking me with its irony. How could everything have changed so quickly, so irrevocably? As I sat down to process the enormity of what I had witnessed, questions and doubts swirled around me. Who was this man to my wife? How had our lives taken such a twisted turn? And, most painfully, How had I been so oblivious to the signs that something was amiss? I realized that nothing was as it seemed, that the familiar had turned foreign in an instant, and that the path forward would be fraught with revelations that I was only beginning to comprehend. In that quiet, solitary moment, I knew that nothing in my life would ever be the same again. The trust one had placed in those closest to me had been shattered, and the journey to reclaim my identity and understand the true nature of love and betrayal was just beginning. The shock of the revelation still throbbed through my veins as I stood there, frozen, unsure of what to do next. The silence that had once been so haunting now exploded into a cacophony of shouts and bitter accusations. Melissa's eyes flashed with a cold anger that was both alien and devastating. Instead of the tears or desperate pleas I had somehow expected, all I got was a venomous glare. Before I could muster another word, the tension in the room snapped like a brittle thread. In a fit of raw, uncontrolled anger, I lunged forward, my fist connecting with Derek's face. The impact was brutal and instantaneous. He crumpled to the floor as if his legs had betrayed him. For a fleeting moment, I thought that might be the end of it, that the shock of my own violent reaction would somehow freeze everything in time. But Melissa wasn't surprised. If anything, her anger deepened, and she didn't even try to hide her disdain for both of us. "You're all just pathetic," she spat, her words slicing through the charged atmosphere. "I'm not the one to be pitied here, Alex. You're the one who's made everything so boring." Her voice dripped with contempt as she glared at me. "You're never home, always lost in your work. You've let this family fall apart. And now, look what it's come to." Her words hit harder than Derek's blow ever could. In that moment, as I stood there catching my breath, I realized with a sickening clarity that I no longer recognized the woman before me. The Melissa I had known, gentle, kind, and full of dreams, was gone. In her place was someone embittered, resentful, and wholly unrecognizable. I felt a crushing weight settle in my chest, an avalanche of betrayal and heartache that threatened to engulf me entirely. All those years of shared laughter, whispered secrets, and promises of forever now seemed like a cruel lie. The man who had once been my safe haven had betrayed me. But even more than that, the woman I had loved had transformed into a stranger who cared little for the life we once built together. As I tried to steady my trembling hands, I couldn't help but think of the countless nights I had stayed late at the office, trying to provide for us, only to be met with a growing chasm between us. I'd always justified my absence as sacrifice, a necessary evil for the greater good of our family. But now, those justifications crumbled under the weight of her biting accusation. I was left questioning if every moment I sacrificed, every lonely night and missed milestone, had been leading me to this devastating moment. Derek groaned on the floor, his eyes meeting mine for a brief, pained instant. Yet, even in that moment of vulnerability, I couldn't summon any pity. My world was in ruins, and his pain was just another stark reminder of how deeply everything had gone wrong. Melissa's indifference to the hurt I was experiencing was perhaps the cruelest blow of all. Instead of remorse, her reaction was pure anger, a calculated, cold dismissal of the life we'd shared. I backed away slowly, feeling as if every step was weighted down by betrayal and disbelief. My heart pounded in a rhythm that drowned out any semblance of logic. I could barely process the full extent of the carnage. My best friend, the person I trusted with my secrets, reduced to a crumpled heap by my own hand, and the woman I had loved for years, whose love had withered into contempt right before my eyes. In that chaotic swirl of emotions, I started to understand the true nature of the betrayal. This wasn't just a moment of infidelity. It was a fracture in the very foundation of everything I had believed in. Melissa's cold, scornful words echoed in my mind, forcing me to confront a painful truth. I had been living with a version of her that I barely recognized. The partner I had once adored had been replaced by someone whose priorities had shifted so drastically that I was now a mere inconvenience in her life. I felt torn between the urge to lash out further and the desperate need to retreat from the overwhelming sense of loss. The room was charged with tension, but the silence that followed was even more oppressive. I could only stare at Melissa, whose eyes burned with a mixture of anger and indifference. Every fiber of my being screamed that I had been betrayed beyond repair. Yet a tiny, nagging voice inside wondered if I was the one who had allowed the distance between us to grow. The stark reality was undeniable. The person I had married was no longer present, replaced by a stranger whose resentment had festered over the years. I was left to navigate the ruins of what we once had, questioning every moment that had led to this betrayal. As I stood there in the dim light of our once happy home, I realized that nothing would ever be the same again. The woman I thought I knew had vanished, leaving behind a hollow shell defined by bitterness and discontent. In that bitter moment of confrontation, I was forced to reckon with the truth that love, trust, and loyalty had all been cruelly dismantled. The path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, but one thing was painfully clear. I could never go back to the life I once knew. The wounds of betrayal had cut too deep, and every step forward would be a journey into a new, unfamiliar existence. A reality where every familiar sound and comforting memory now served as a reminder of what had been irrevocably lost. I couldn't afford to wallow in self-pity. Not now, not ever. In the raw aftermath of that night's betrayal, a strange clarity settled over me. I realized that arguing or trying to salvage what remained was a fool's errand. Instead, I had to plan my next move with precision, like a chess master anticipating every potential counter. The woman I had married had shown her true colors, and if I was going to survive this, I had to strike back with equal measure. That night, as I sat alone in the dark silence of my study, my mind began to map out the battle lines. I envisioned every move, every necessary step to regain control. I wasn't going to let her spiraling irresponsibility and blatant disregard for our shared life ruin everything I had built. I decided then and there, I would counterattack not with fists or heated arguments, but with cold, calculated precision. The first order of business was to secure my financial future. I logged into our joint bank account from the solitude of my study, my fingers trembling slightly with a mix of anger and resolve. I navigated the labyrinth of online security protocols, my heart pounding with every keystroke. One by one, I froze every joint account, effectively severing any future financial entanglements between us. I blocked all of her cards and notified the banks of suspicious activities, ensuring that the money we'd painstakingly saved over the years would no longer be at risk of vanishing into her reckless schemes. Each click, each confirmation message on the screen, felt like a small reclaiming of my power, a silent, steady exorcism of the betrayal that had haunted me just hours before. It was a cold, methodical act of self-preservation, and with each frozen account, I felt the weight of our shared past lift off my shoulders. But finances were just the beginning. I knew that to fully dismantle the foundation of our union, I needed to gather irrefutable evidence of her irresponsibility, a dossier that would not only protect me legally, but also lay bare the truth for anyone who cared to see it. That's when I made the call to an experienced lawyer, someone with a reputation for turning tumultuous marital disputes into strategic victories. In a single conversation, I laid out my plan, my voice steady as I recounted every detail of the betrayal and the subsequent financial reckoning. The lawyer listened intently, his silence punctuated by the occasional hum of approval. His reassurance bolstered my resolve, and he agreed to represent my interests with a determination that matched my own. Armed with his guidance, I embarked on the next phase: evidence collection. Every careless expense, every missed payment, every instance of frivolous spending that I'd once brushed aside as inconsequential was now a potential piece in the puzzle of her financial irresponsibility. I sifted through years of bank statements, credit card bills, and transaction histories. With each document, I could feel the magnitude of her recklessness growing larger, the numbers and dates forming a damning narrative of neglect and impulsivity. I also began to compile a timeline, a comprehensive account of her erratic behavior, capturing the moments when her actions directly endangered our family's stability. This wasn't just about financial recklessness. It was about exposing a pattern of disregard for the very life we had built together. I meticulously noted every instance when she had squandered resources, neglected responsibilities, or prioritized fleeting pleasures over our future. Each entry in that timeline was a nail in the coffin of the partnership I once believed in. Late into the night, I sat surrounded by a sea of paperwork and digital files, each piece a testament to the unraveling of a life I had once known. There was a certain grim satisfaction in the act. Each document, each recorded transaction was like a fragment of a mirror, slowly reflecting back the image of a woman I barely recognized. And in that reflection, I saw the raw truth of her indifference and my own complicity in a marriage that had become a battlefield. As I organized the evidence, I felt a surge of determination. This wasn't just about financial ruin or personal betrayal. It was about reclaiming my dignity and ensuring that every misstep, every moment of negligence was documented for posterity. I was building an unassailable case, one that would not only secure my legal footing, but also serve as a public testament to the consequences of betrayal and irresponsibility. With each passing hour, my plans solidified. I wasn't going to let emotions dictate the course of my actions. Instead, I would let facts, evidence, and the cold logic of financial stability guide me. In that quiet, determined space of my study, I vowed that I would reclaim what was mine. My peace of mind, my future, and ultimately, my self-respect. This was the beginning of a counterattack that I knew would change the course of my life, and I was ready to face every challenge head-on. As I dove deeper into the mountain of evidence, I began to piece together a picture that was even more damning than I had initially feared. Every file, every screenshot, every audio clip added another layer to the story of Melissa's recklessness. A narrative that went far beyond the betrayal I had witnessed that night. It all started with a routine review of our financial statements. I had anticipated finding the usual traces of expenses. Groceries, bills, the odd splurge on a weekend dinner. But what I uncovered was staggering. Over the course of several months, Melissa had been spending upwards of $10,000 on alcohol and entertainment alone. The numbers were undeniable. Luxury bars, exclusive clubs, expensive parties. Each transaction was a blow, a glaring reminder that she had been channeling money that was meant for our family's future into a self-destructive indulgence. I couldn't help but feel that this wasn't just a series of isolated incidents. It was a pattern, a lifestyle choice that she had made without any consideration for the consequences. But the financial evidence was just the tip of the iceberg. I began sifting through her phone records and text messages, looking for any trace of the woman I thought I knew. What I found was even more shocking. Hidden among the mundane group chats and memes were texts that painted a picture of deep-seated resentment. In several messages to her friends, Melissa casually complained that having a child is prison. The words stung every time I read them, echoing in my mind like a painful refrain. It wasn't just a fleeting moment of frustration. It was a repeated, bitter admission that she felt trapped by the very life we had built together. The texts were raw and unfiltered, and in them, I could sense a woman who resented the responsibilities of motherhood, who viewed Lily not as the light of her life but as a burden. Each message chipped away at the idealized image I had of her, replacing it with something far more disconcerting. I had always known that marriage was complicated, that every relationship had its rough patches, but reading these words made it clear that Melissa's unhappiness was not a recent development. It was something that had been festering for a long time. Then came the audio recordings. I had been cautious at first, unsure of what I might find as I combed through her phone for more evidence of her financial indiscretions. But as I listened to one recording after another, my heart sank with each passing moment. In one particularly damning clip, her voice, so usually so measured, rang out in frustration. She said something that sent a cold shiver down my spine. If it weren't for Lily, her life would be so much easier. The casual cruelty in her tone was unmistakable, and I couldn't ignore it. It was as if the very idea of our daughter was an inconvenience, a complication in her pursuit of freedom and self-indulgence. Sitting there in my study, surrounded by piles of evidence, I felt the full weight of the betrayal. Every text message, every audio recording was like a shard of glass, each one cutting a little deeper into the trust one had once placed in her. It wasn't just about the money or the lies. It was about the complete disregard for the life we had built together, the sacrifices made, and the promises that had been broken along the way. I spent hours, sometimes well into the night, meticulously documenting everything. I created detailed spreadsheets and timelines, cross-referencing every transaction with the corresponding messages and recordings. The more I organized the evidence, the more I realized how systematic and calculated her actions had been. This wasn't the impulsive behavior of someone having a bad day. It was a deliberate, ongoing campaign of self-interest that left no doubt about where her priorities truly lay. Every discovery deepened the sense of isolation I felt. I had always known that there were cracks in our relationship, subtle hints of dissatisfaction here and there, but I had never imagined that they would culminate in something so all-encompassing. The financial recklessness, the bitter messages, and the heartless recordings all combined to reveal a woman who had been slowly unraveling the very fabric of our shared life. I couldn't help but feel a surge of both sorrow and vindication. On one hand, the evidence confirmed what I had feared most, that I had been living a lie, clinging to an illusion of a partnership that was anything but reciprocal. On the other hand, there was a grim satisfaction in knowing that I now held the truth in my hands, a truth that was irrefutable and damning. In that moment, as I sat back and surveyed the digital trail of Melissa's betrayal, I knew that my next steps would be crucial. This evidence wasn't just for my own peace of mind, it was the cornerstone of my counterattack. I had to ensure that every misstep, every selfish act, was laid bare for the world to see, so that I could finally reclaim the dignity that had been stripped away by her actions. The process of gathering this dirt was painful, each piece of evidence a reminder of the life I thought I knew. But it was also a necessary step toward moving forward, toward severing the ties of deceit that had bound me to a past I was no longer willing to live in. With every text, every audio clip, every bank statement, I was rebuilding my understanding of who I was and who I was not. And as I continued to piece together the shattered remnants of our once-beloved life, I vowed that this discovery would be the turning point, a decisive moment when I would finally take control of my own destiny, no longer a prisoner of someone else's selfish desires. I never imagined that my life would soon be dominated by a courtroom drama, but there I was, sitting across from a judge in an emergency custody hearing for Lily. After everything that had happened, the stakes couldn't have been higher. Every nerve in my body was on edge, not just for my own sake, but for the well-being of my little girl. I needed to prove that I was the stable, responsible parent Lily deserved, and that Melissa's chaotic, self-centered behavior posed a serious risk to her. The day of the trial was surreal. I walked into the courtroom, clutching a thick binder filled with meticulously organized records, school meeting notes, medical visit logs, even photos of our time together at parent-teacher conferences. I had never felt so exposed, yet at the same time, every document was a lifeline, a testament to the unwavering dedication I'd poured into being a good father. The judge, a composed and thoughtful woman, regarded me with an intensity that made me feel as though every flaw in my character was being weighed against the evidence before her. She listened intently as I recounted the details of my daily routines, the times I had attended school meetings, the countless hours spent in the waiting room during Lily's medical visits, and even the small moments when I helped her with homework. Every detail was meant to counter the narrative that Melissa's lawyer was crafting, that I was an absent father, too busy with work to care for my child. Melissa's lawyer took the floor next, his tone slick and rehearsed. He painted me as a man consumed by his career, a shadowy figure who drifted in and out of Lily's life. I felt my heart race as he suggested that my long hours at work translated into neglect, that my absence in the family home had created a void in Lily's upbringing. His words were cutting, and for a moment, I questioned if the image of the responsible father I had clung to might somehow be tarnished by his portrayal. But then I stood up, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through me. I presented my binder, one piece of evidence after another. I recalled the frantic phone calls with teachers when Lily was sick, the comforting words I had offered her during stressful moments, and the unwavering commitment I had demonstrated even when I was exhausted. I laid out the timeline of our family's life, contrasting it sharply with Melissa's own erratic behavior, her endless records of spending on alcohol and frivolous entertainment, her text messages filled with bitterness and resentment, and even those damning audio recordings where she callously remarked that if it weren't for Lily, her life would be so much easier. The courtroom grew tense as I detailed how Melissa's actions had left our daughter vulnerable. Not just emotionally, but in a literal, physical sense. I spoke of nights when I had stayed up worrying about Lily's safety, knowing that her mother's unpredictable behavior could turn dangerous at any moment. Every piece of evidence was a brick in the wall I was building to protect my daughter, a dam meant to hold back the chaos that Melissa had allowed to seep into our lives. As I spoke, I caught a glimpse of Melissa in the gallery, her eyes burning with a mix of defiance and regret. For a brief moment, I wondered if there was a part of her that still remembered the woman I once loved. But those moments were fleeting, and the harsh reality of her irresponsibility and betrayal quickly snapped me back to focus. I wasn't there to rekindle old flames or to rehash the past. I was there to secure Lily's future. The turning point in the trial came when the judge asked me directly about my daily involvement in Lily's life. I recounted in detail my routine: waking up early to make sure she had breakfast, the drive to school together, the laughter shared over small moments that no one else could witness. I described the joy on her face when we visited the local park on weekends, the way she clutched my hand in moments of uncertainty. Every word was laced with the conviction that I was, and always had been, a devoted father. In a stunning twist, Melissa's lawyer tried to pivot by suggesting that my work was the reason for our marital breakdown, implying that I had somehow contributed to the very estrangement that now endangered Lily. It was a desperate maneuver, one that only reinforced the evidence I had painstakingly assembled. I countered by highlighting that while I had been dedicated to my career, it was always with the intention of providing a secure future for Lily. I showed records of every parent-teacher conference and medical appointment, each one a testament to my commitment, not just as a father, but as the pillar of stability in Lily's life. After hours of heated exchanges and the presentation of evidence from both sides, the judge finally retreated to her chambers to deliberate. Every minute that ticked by in that sterile courtroom felt like an eternity. I sat there, gripping Lily's favorite stuffed animal that I had brought for comfort, and prayed silently that justice would prevail. When the judge re-entered, the tension was palpable. In a measured and decisive tone, she ruled that, given the overwhelming evidence of Melissa's irresponsibility and the risks posed to Lily, I was granted full temporary custody. Melissa would only be allowed short, supervised visits until the court could further assess the situation. The moment those words echoed through the courtroom, a mixture of relief and sorrow flooded me. Relief that Lily would be safe in my care, and sorrow for the irrevocable damage that had been done to a family that once promised so much. Walking out of that courtroom, the weight of the verdict settled over me like a heavy cloak. I had won the battle for custody, but the war for healing and rebuilding our shattered lives was just beginning. Despite the court's decision, I knew that every step forward would be fraught with challenges: legal, emotional, and personal. Yet, as I looked down at Lily, who clutched her new drawing of us together, I vowed that I would do whatever it took to ensure that she never felt the sting of betrayal or the chill of neglect again. This trial was just the first chapter in a long journey toward reclaiming the life we deserved, one where truth, responsibility, and love would guide us toward a better future. I thought the worst was behind me, that the courtroom victory had sealed our future. But life, it seems, had one more cruel twist in store. It happened on a quiet evening when Lily, her small face etched with confusion and sadness, finally spoke up about a memory that had haunted her for too long. As we sat together in our modest living room, she hesitated before confessing in a trembling whisper, "Daddy, I saw Mommy kiss Derek one night." Her words hit me like a freight train. In that moment, every ounce of betrayal I'd felt all those months ago surged back with a violent intensity. I had already built an unshakable case against Melissa, a case built on financial recklessness, heartless texts, and callous recordings. But now, Lily's admission added a devastating personal blow. My daughter's innocent recollection was proof that not only had Melissa betrayed our family, but she had also shattered the trust and sanctity of the mother-daughter bond. I sat there, processing her words, my heart pounding as the full scope of the betrayal crashed over me. I realized that this was the final piece needed to tip the scales decisively in Lily's favor. I couldn't stand by and allow our daughter to grow up in an environment where the person meant to nurture her love was complicit in deception. With resolute determination, I added Lily's admission to the mounting evidence in our case. I knew that if I truly wanted to protect her future, I had to act swiftly and decisively. Without delay, I filed for full and undisputed custody of Lily. The legal documents now carried an even heavier weight of truth. A truth that Melissa had not only been financially irresponsible and emotionally detached, but had also betrayed the fundamental trust of motherhood. I was no longer fighting just for a piece of what we once shared. I was fighting to reclaim my daughter's well-being and to shield her from further harm. The final blow was not just in the courtroom. With all the evidence laid out before me and my decision made clear, I issued an ultimatum to Melissa. She had 48 hours to move out of our house. This home, filled with memories of better times, laughter, and hopes for a future together, had become a battleground, a constant reminder of the betrayal that had torn our family apart. It was time to reclaim my space and, more importantly, to restore a semblance of stability for Lily. I delivered the news with a calm finality that belied the storm raging inside me. "Melissa," I said, my voice steady but laden with the weight of everything we'd been through, "you have 48 hours to leave the house. This is not just about me. It's about Lily and her right to a safe, honest environment." I watched as the reality of my words sank in, feeling a mixture of sorrow, relief, and a fierce resolve. In those 48 hours that followed, as I began the painful process of untangling the remnants of a shattered past, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought me here. Every piece of evidence, every sleepless night spent poring over bank statements, texts, and recordings had culminated in this decisive moment. A final, irrevocable blow to the life we once thought we'd share. I knew there would be scars, both visible and hidden, left by this battle. But as I looked at Lily, her eyes searching mine for reassurance, I vowed to rebuild a future defined by honesty, stability, and love. A future where betrayal had no power, and where the truth would always shine through. The final chapter of this dark saga had been written, and though the pain would linger for some time, it was also the beginning of a new life. A life where I would do everything in my power to protect the person who mattered most, my daughter. In the weeks that followed, reality set in like a cold shower. Melissa was left with nothing. No money, no daughter, no home. It was as if the universe had conspired to strip her of every illusion she'd clung to, leaving her facing the full weight of the choices she had made. I watched from afar as she wandered through our once shared spaces, now echoing with memories that only deepened her isolation. The silence in the empty rooms was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos she had once orchestrated. For the first time, she was forced to confront the consequences of her actions without any refuge or denial. Lily and I slowly began to stitch together a new life, one built on the fragile hope of healing and the promise of a brighter future. Every morning, as we prepared for our day together, I could see in Lily's eyes that glimmer of resilience, a spark that had survived the turbulence of the past months. We moved to a small, welcoming apartment in a quiet neighborhood, where the echoes of our old life were gradually replaced by the gentle hum of everyday normalcy. The transition wasn't easy. There were moments of sorrow and the lingering presence of a toxic past that we had to consciously leave behind. But with every step we took, it felt as though we were reclaiming something precious. Our own chance to live free from the shadows of betrayal. The final nail in the coffin came during the last court session. With a calm that belied the storm I had weathered, the judge delivered the final verdict. The court officially stripped Melissa of any remaining custody rights, cementing my status as Lily's sole guardian. The decision was not made out of vindictiveness, but rather out of a stark recognition of the risks she posed to our daughter's well-being. It was a bittersweet victory, a legal closure that confirmed what I had long known in my heart. I was now fully responsible for Lily, not by choice alone, but because the evidence of the past had rendered any alternative untenable. As I walked out of the courtroom, I felt an odd mixture of relief and profound sadness. I was relieved because Lily was safe, and because we had finally broken free from a toxic presence. But there was also sorrow, a mourning for the life we had lost and for the inevitable scars that would take time to heal. I knew that the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but I was determined to face them head-on, bolstered by the fierce love I had for my daughter. Meanwhile, Melissa was left to grapple with the reality of her new existence. No longer shielded by financial security or the comfort of familial bonds, she was forced to take responsibility for the wreckage she had created. For years, she had evaded accountability by cloaking her actions in denial and self-indulgence. Now, stripped of every escape route, she was left alone with nothing but the cold, unyielding truth. I later learned that she had begun attending counseling sessions, an acknowledgement, perhaps, that she could no longer run from the consequences of her behavior. It was a stark, solitary journey towards self-awareness, one that she would have to traverse without the safety net of a family she once took for granted. As Lily and I settled into our new routine, the scars of the past slowly began to fade into the background, replaced by a cautious optimism about the future. We had forged our path out of the ruins, determined to build a life defined not by bitterness and betrayal, but by resilience and hope. Each day was a reminder that, even after the deepest cuts, healing was possible. In our small apartment filled with second-hand furniture and new beginnings, I made a silent promise to protect Lily with every ounce of strength I had and to cherish the fragile beauty of our newfound freedom. In the end, the journey had taught me that sometimes the hardest battles are the ones fought not just in courtrooms or within the confines of a broken home, but within the depths of one's own heart. And as I held Lily's hand that day, looking out at the horizon of possibilities, I knew that while the scars might never fully disappear, we were ready to embrace a future where love, responsibility, and the courage to start anew would guide us forward.